Welcome to Program 6, Practicing to Win. This is courtroom communication skills. After you've watched this program, here's what you'll be able to do.
You'll learn that practicing out loud is the only way to be confident in court.
You'll learn to eliminate the habit of saying okay on direct and on cross.
You'll learn to exploit muscle memory as you practice beginnings and endings.
And you'll learn that by watching video of yourself, you can really make yourself better. We've bombarded you with ideas. How can you get better in court? And now, let's talk about how do you practice all these ideas? You're busy, you're in practice as a lawyer, you're in and out of court. When do you possibly have time to practice these skills? Here are some rules of thumb that will make it easier for you. We generally say there are 3 words that help you figure out how much should you practice. Practice alone, practice aloud, and practice a lot. What do we mean by that? First of all, let's think about how you practice and in front of whom you might practice. We always say at the beginning, go in your office, close the door, and practice alone. You can practice in your car too, you can practice walking your dog. But at the very beginning, don't practice in front of other people. Go someplace where you can make mistakes. Go someplace where the stuff that you don't want to come out in court can come out and there's no penalty. The stuff that might not be the smartest thing you ever said. The stuff where you had an idea about a phrase that you might want to use or an idea, but it came out wrong. Go someplace where you're free to make mistakes and there's no risk at all. And while you're in there, then you can start to develop your ideas. This is where you rough draft your ideas. And let's be clear, when we say go in a room alone, we mean go in there and start talking. Don't go in and start writing. Lots of attorneys will say, well, I was so busy preparing, I didn't have time to practice, meaning they were writing it out, writing down an entire opening. Now, if that's part of your process, go ahead and do it, but as soon as you can, put it aside. Condense it into some trigger points, the main ideas for an opening, the big topics for an examination. Then stand up, find your stance, take some deep breaths, and start talking. The best idea is to put on a timer. Put it on for 10 minutes. So it'll beep when it goes off and you're finished. See where you get in 10 minutes. The only way to find out what is 10 minutes of talking is to use a timer. So you're alone in your office, you're talking for 5 or 10 or 15 minutes, and you're talking off a list of trigger points. So right away, you've gotten yourself on your feet and you're simulating the conditions in the courtroom. If you keep writing, that's not simulating what it's like to talk out loud. And if you keep writing, that's in a different voice. You want to practice in your own voice, the voice you talk in, so you can start to hear yourself use lawyer words or police officer words. You want to weed out the stuff that's not in the vernacular. You'll probably be talking to a jury. That's a much more vernacular kind of talking, much more everyday speech than we speak in the legal profession. Your language needs to change, and the only way it can change is if you talk out loud. So that alone practice has to be out loud so you can hear the language, hear it in your own voice, and know what's really good. Believe me, in a short time, you're going to find exactly the right pace and you're going to start to get in a groove. You're looking for that talking groove in your structured improvisation that is your best courtroom vernacular. You can only do that out loud. You can do it in your car, and you can do it walking a dog or doing anything that's by yourself, but you got to talk out loud. Now might be the time, after you've talked out loud a bit, to bring colleagues in and let them start to listen to you. After you've drafted it for a bit, after you've worked on a theme, they can help you then because it'll be good enough to critique. So after you've done the out loud part alone and perhaps with colleagues, remember, try to do it a lot. You don't have to do it for 4 hours at a time or even 1 hour at a time. Every minute counts. If you say, before I walk out the door for lunch, I'm going to close the door and practice 5 minutes, that counts. Every little bit of practice gives you the muscle memory that you're after to be able to be fluent in court. And that's what you need. Fluency, that articulate quality of having said it before. So you don't have to practice a long time, but every little bit counts. So practice in your car. Look at the clock on the dashboard and say, I'm going to talk for 10 minutes and I'm working on my opening. That counts. So remember, alone, aloud, a lot. How do you practice for each phase of trial? Let's think first about openings. Your first chance to stand up and form a relationship with a jury. Stand up and state the most important thing you could say to them first. That is usually a theme. It's something that has to do with the real substance. It's not boilerplate about how this is going to be a roadmap to what comes after. It's not something where you spin your wheels on non-substantive phrases and catchphrases that we've heard people say before. This is your chance to stand up and say something important about the case. If you are required to say, may it please the court, of course you should say that. But right after that, cut to something important. For example, if your case is about a fire and arson, you might start out by saying, desperate men do desperate things. Practice standing up and setting a pace, speaking in phrases. Desperate men do desperate things. Emphasizing the key words and setting the pace you need at the very beginning to let that adrenaline drain away into the silences. You've got your gestures going. Or it might be this. Ladies and gentlemen, this case is about one word. One word that was missing. That word is insurance. Phrase the beginning of your opening so that you have plenty of time to keep breathing and set that pace that will let you look your jurors in the eye. Make eye contact as you slowly work your way through the very important stuff, and then it can start to ebb and flow. Then you might put in some more boilerplate. But at your opening, which is more important to set the pace there than almost any place else, because that's the very first time you stand up in front of this panel. And some of these people, of course, you did not want on this jury. It's your moment to make a relationship with them. That's where you want to set the pace on your openings.
In teaching trial advocacy for decades, I know that one of the most ubiquitous and pernicious habits that drive people crazy both in trial advocacy training and in actual courtrooms is this simple habit involving direct examination and the validation after a witness has answered when the examiner says, okay, here's the rhythm of how it works. The examiner says, where do you live? The witness says, Phoenix, Arizona. Okay. How long you've lived in Phoenix, Arizona? 2 years. Okay. 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 And they discover that they say after every answer, okay. They don't know they're doing it, so here's the dilemma. How do you stop doing what you don't know you are doing? And truly, it can happen for an entire examination. Sometimes when people in trial ad training programs are told about it, they stop saying it, but they still mouth it. That's how pernicious the habit is. Here's how to get rid of it. It's a matter of timing. And the brain operates best not on the negative instruction. Stop saying okay, because the brain doesn't know it has chosen to say okay. If it did, it would stop. So it's all about the timing. It's going to happen this way. Where do you live? Phoenix, Arizona. Okay. In other words, as soon as the witness is done, Phoenix, Arizona. Okay. How long have you lived in Phoenix? 2 years. Okay. So here's my simple suggestion to get rid of that habit. And that is this. As soon as the witness is done answering, that's when you're going to leap in with an okay. It's a filler noise. It's another thinking noise to fill up the silence. As soon as that witness is done, you as the examiner are going to inhale. So the rhythm will be this. Where do you live? I live in Phoenix, Arizona. How long have you lived in Phoenix? About 2 years. What do you do in Phoenix? In other words, that little breath where the air sneaks in after the answer prevents the okay from slipping out. Now, we say okay for a lot of reasons. One is we say okay all the time in conversation. Okay, okay, okay. So it's one of those words we've probably said as much as any other word in the English language. We also say okay because it is that validator. I heard the answer, okay. And so there are all sorts of reasons for us to reflexively and habitually say it, and you want to get rid of it. The solution is an inhalation. Preparing yourself to think, to calm yourself down, to get some oxygen to your brain. So you're standing there listening to the witness and you're saying, as soon as that witness is done, I'm going to inhale. And what do you do in Phoenix? And the air going in prevents the okay from coming out. Breath is the solution.
You've got a way to practice out loud your openings, speaking in phrases. And now you've got some ideas about how to practice out loud your questions for direct examination. Let's think about how to practice your questions for cross-examination and make sure that they are free of the most pernicious problem that we hear in court and in trial skills programs all the time. That is that between every single question, just like people tend to say okay in between questions on direct, on cross we hear this, and we hear the lawyer thinking in the silence that should be happening after a question. Just as okay fills in that crucial silence between questions on direct, on cross what we hear is and. It sounds like this. Officer Sledham, you first heard the storm at 3 a.m. And Officer Sledham says, yes. And the lawyer says, and you waited several hours before you came on deck. Officer Sledham says, that's right, I did. And you came on deck at 9:30 a.m. Yes. And so it goes. And is always on the same pitch, is usually on the same pitch, and we've set up a rhythm that often never goes away throughout an entire cross-examination. The reason we say it is because we're connecting the questions. Here's my next question, and I'm going to ask you that, and I'm going to ask you that. When we're thinking of the next question, we then throw in and, there, I've got it. It's white noise for the listener, and it's white noise for you. It doesn't help your witness either. You want to stay on that witness and not kind of step away into your own thinking booth while he gets time to think about how he could mess with you, how he could resist you. You want to stay on your witness, and silence is frankly scarier than and. It's always on the same pitch and it's always the same duration once you've set up those thinking noises. Here's how it should be. Officer Sluttum, you first heard the storm at 3 a.m. Yes. You didn't come on deck for quite some time. No, I didn't. You came on deck at 9:30 a.m. Yes, I did. 6.5 hours later. Yes. It's much cleaner. It gives the jury time to be right with you and think, what's she asking him now? What's going on? And they can almost be with you in the examination. Throwing in "and" is just a habit. It's conversational. It's what we do in everyday speech. But here in the courtroom, it's sloppy. So let's get rid of the sloppy stuff and insert silence instead. That's where you can breathe. Sometimes you can accelerate the pace, but it's okay to let the silence fall, even on cross. And doesn't put any more pressure on a witness just because it's happening. The silence is preferable.
Just as you need to practice using the silence to control your pace in opening statement, to eliminate the okay or the and in examinations, you really want to practice using that silence in closing argument. Because silence is when persuasion happens. Silence is when the jury is drawing their conclusions. And they need time for that. Every silence implies this question. Are you with me? Do you get it? Well, you're not going to say those words, but each silence implies that that's what you're doing. You're giving them time to think. Giving them time for that eureka moment of, oh, I get it. Because argument is about connecting the dots. And they may need, as your jury, more time than you do, because of course you're a lawyer and you know these facts a lot better than they do, for them to actually make that conclusion and draw that inference. But you need to practice using the silence. It needs to be a conscious part of your technique. So as you are practicing for your closing argument, you need to come to the end of a particular argument, and when you do, stop and let the silence happen. And it takes a real effort to put 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 whole seconds into an argument. But implied in that is think about that. In fact, I will stop right now and think about that. Well, while you may not actually say the phrase think about it, that's what you mean. So you need to practice, and silence is so often the solution. And you can only get comfortable with it if you practice using the silence in a room alone, talking aloud, and doing that a lot. Then you'll be able to speak persuasively.
We've talked about some habits that we'd like to eliminate from the courtroom because they're sloppy and they get in the way of the fact finders zeroing in on your case and your persuasive arguments. Let's talk again about another one of those sloppy habits and how we can practice to get rid of it. This has to do with intonation, with the inflection of your voice. Earlier, we talked about the curving up talk inflection, the one that goes, hello, my name is Marcia Hunter. I'm a communications consultant. I don't sound like I know what I'm talking about. Let's think more carefully about why those up talks tend to happen. First of all, we've picked it up from our friends. This kind of up talk inflection is all around us in culture now. It's like catching the flu or catching a cold, maybe not so serious as the flu. But we hear our friends say it, and we, in order to make a relationship with them, imitate the way they talk. That's why we pick up like, you know, kinda, sort of, all those filler thinking noises that infuse our everyday language. They're like the flotsam and jetsam of bad habits superimposed on language. Let's try to get rid of this up talk by thinking about it a little bit more. It's also the music of making a list. We all make lists all the time. Usually we keep them in our head. And when we verbalize them, it's often something like this. Go to the store and get me some tomatoes, bread, milk, a dozen eggs, and 6 apples. So I have just gone like this. Huh, 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 huh. That's the music of what I just said. When I stand to appear in court, I've got a list of things I want to say. It's implicit in my head. I haven't probably said them like this, but under pressure and under adrenaline's rush, we can often say, may it please the court, my name is Marcia Hunter, I represent plaintiff, and I'm here to say desperate men do desperate things. We can rush ourselves right into the uptalk that we wish we hadn't done. It just sounds indecisive. And we want to sound more decisive. So to cure yourself of that problem, remember to put silences in, especially at the very beginnings. The uptalk, that uptick of inflection, often happens at beginnings when we're in a rush. So you want to give yourself enough silence to actually hear it happen. Just like getting rid of okay on direct and on cross. You gotta hear it first in order to get rid of the habit. And it's best to hear it echoing in the room in your own voice in silence. So that's one way you're gonna get rid of that uptalk. Remember also that this upward inflection is the way we ask curious questions. So we're not gonna get rid of it from the courtroom entirely. When we say, where do you live? That's got an uptalk too, but it sounds like a curious question. Make sure you can distinguish between these inflective patterns so you can use them to your advantage in the courtroom. Don't just let them happen to you because it's a random choice that your brain and your voice made without really thinking about, is this appropriate in the courtroom? Adrenaline can make us rush and make choices that are inflective and they're not quite right. Leave plenty of silences and you'll start to hear it when you're practicing alone and out loud. Let's talk about those longer speeches in the courtroom. How do you practice for a longer opening or closing? Here's how to think about it. We always hear people say, now start strong and end strong. That's the way to do it. You want to start strong and end strong. Okay, how do you do that? Practice the beginnings and then practice the endings. Know where you want to start and know how you want to end. And when I say that, I mean practice the sentences, the few paragraphs that are the beginning a lot, and practice the endings a lot also. Just in case the judge says, counselor, we told you you'd have 20 minutes, you've got 8. You may proceed. And suddenly your closing argument just had a big bunch of it hacked out of the middle. If you know how you're starting and how you're ending, you're going to be okay. The middle will take care of itself. What do I mean, though, when I say practice the beginning and the ending, considering that I also said, don't memorize it? You may want to memorize a theme. You want to memorize the exact thing you're asking the jury for. So those words may be verbatim, a theme that trips off your tongue that you can weave in and out of the trial. Those things may appear verbatim. The rest of a longer beginning, as soon as you're up to a paragraph, you're improvising. But the way you can hone those first few paragraphs is to practice it a lot. Keep repeating it, keep going back and looking for a better way to say it. Same with the endings, keep going back. Is that exactly how I want to ask the jury? I want to make sure that I've told them or emphasize that the judge has read this part of the law to them, and I want to ask them for this specific amount. I want to make sure I'm open and that I'm looking at those people that I think may be with me, but I'm not sure, but including everyone. So practice the whole thing. As you stand to start your closing argument, the very beginning of that should include the whole jury. Make sure that you know what those first few paragraphs are and what the major markers in the middle will be, and make sure you know the structure of that ending. So even though it won't be completely verbatim, you've got the beginning and the ends nailed. You've practiced it, it's on the tip of your tongue, and you can make your way around the ideas fluently and with great articulate finesse. That's what you're after. So practice beginnings and endings. And one last plea. Learn to watch yourself on video. It's the greatest practice tool there is. And you've probably in your pocket on your desk right now got a couple of video cameras, and your smartphone, and your notebook, on a laptop. You can make video of yourself any place, all the time. Make video of your practice. If you have got a really important opening happening or a crucial closing, why wouldn't you want to see yourself and see your flaws? Yes, it's hard to watch. None of us likes it. I don't like to watch myself on video. But once we do sit down and watch it, it becomes the most objective tool you can have. So here's where you got to take the biggest breath of all and say, I'm just going to set up my camera right here, put my phone right there, turn it on, and talk for 10 minutes. You'll be amazed at what you can see. Use the video self-review checklist that we're giving you to help assess your own skills. And I guarantee you've already got strengths. So learn to use this modern tool and use it to your advantage. You'll be glad you did, because then you'll really be able to see if you can speak persuasively while you think on your feet. Now you've got some tools for practicing your courtroom delivery. So speak these mantras out loud.
Say this. Set the tempo of your opening by saying the first sentences in phrases. Say that.
Inhale after the witness answers and before asking the next question. Say that.
Emphasize at least one word in every question on direct or cross. Say that.
Persuasion happens during silence, so practice using it. Say that.
The only way to be a confident advocate in the courtroom is to practice. And when you do, you will be able to speak persuasively as you think on your feet.